What's up everyone? Today we're gonna make more progress on Jet's Forest, and the focus of today's time-lapse is the platforms on the big trees and the big trees. We thought about how to make the big trees for a long time, and we opted for a modular design because we're gonna have a few big trees and I don't want them to repeat very obviously because they are so big. So we made a few sections of the big trees and also branches for all of them. So we created our own custom ones. Now to separate them a little bit from the traditional trees that you find on the ground level, we made them a little bit spirally, and I think this fits the Jet's Forest vibe really well. And first I thought I missed some footage or missed the stream, but I actually did a little bit off stream and detailed the surrounding area a little bit with grass and stones. You will see this at the end of the video. And yeah, of course we also made the first platforms. We went for like a simple square platform that we can just smoosh together to create bigger platforms, as well as these wooden structural pieces that are leaned onto the big tree to support the platforms. And we also made a tent that we can place on the platforms. But yeah, I hope you have fun with the time-lapse. I noticed that in the last time-lapse it was like almost an hour long. I was like, what happened here? And it turns out there's like a setting you have to enable in DaVinci Resolve to actually get accurate speed ramping. So yeah, all the time lapses have the actual real speed I usually use for my time lapses now, and they should be always around 30 to 40 minutes long now, depending on how long the stream was we worked on this. And also sometimes I put like 2 or 3 streams together if it's one thing that we worked on over several streams, but that will probably only be relevant for like city levels and stuff that is coming up in the next month. For now, enjoy the time-lapse. I will hear you again in the end of the video to showcase what we've done today. Alright, here we are. One thing actually I forgot to mention in the last video was we made these invisible shadow casters. You can see it on the floor here, because in Dreams for the leaves we use these big sculpts and they would cast a huge shadow on the ground. So we made like an invisible shadow caster that emulates branches and leaves that cast shadows on the bottom floor. But yeah, here we see it. The first platforms, you really get a feeling how this could end up looking, and it will end up looking also. But yeah, we only placed a few platforms randomly to feel out how we're gonna place them, if we need to place more trees and stuff like that. And yeah, you can jump between them and climb them up. Those ladder pieces, we will get to that in a later video. That will be an interesting topic to talk about. But yeah. This was also the first time when I first ran around in this level that we made here that I noticed how snappy and fluid our platforming actually is. You always only get it in the test levels, but you can really like jump in between the trees without much hesitation, right? It's super precise and you don't really need to think about it anymore, really. Maybe it's also just because I spent so many hours with this player character jumping around. But I hope you will get to that point too when you play the game or play this level, even maybe in the map of the month someday. It really is pretty cool to jump around through these trees. And yeah, as I said in the beginning, I detailed a little bit of the outside area here already, blocked in a little bit more stones in the surrounding area, and also placed trees along the paths. But that's it for today. I hope you enjoyed it, and I see you again in the next one. Stay safe, bye bye!